Open your Bibles to the book of Job. See where we are. Job chapter 1, verse 12. Job chapter 1 and verse 12. Can y'all hear that? Job chapter 1, verse 12. You got me? You hear me back there? Yeah. Okay. I just need to speak up a little bit. I'm kind of soft-spoken anyway. Isn't that right? Job chapter 1, verse 12. Now, I believe it was this Wednesday night class last week. I asked to read Job chapters 1 and 2 twice before we came back to class. And there was a particular question that I want to deal with in verse 12. Let's read verse 12 together. In fact, somebody would read Job chapter 1, verse 12 for me, and then I'm going to ask a one-word question, and I'll just leave it open to be answered. Someone. Okay. So, let's bring ourselves up to speed. Hast thou considered my servant Job? Well, Satan has told God, we go back to verse 7, whence comest thou? Why, I've been in the earth walking around. I've been in my kingdom and my territory and my domain. And so, hast thou considered my servant Job? And Satan replies, your servant Job, you've bribed him. You've paid him off. No wonder he worships you. Look at everything you've done. You've hedged him up. I can't get to him. And so the response for that is, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself not put forth not thine hand. Now here's my one-word question to everybody. Why? Okay. So we would have something incredible to discuss in Bible class. We have already demonstrated that God does not introduce Job to Satan. Right? God says, hast thou considered my servant Job? And Satan doesn't say, I don't think I've ever heard of him, but I appreciate you bringing him up because now I'm going after him. He says, hey, I've been trying. And then says, you just won't let me get to him. Now, who is the sovereign ruler of all things? God. Who is the provider and the protector of all humanity? But what does God tell Job with regards to Satan? I have sovereign rule over all of humanity, including my servant Job. He's in my hands. I'm going to put him in your hands. You be his provider. You be his protector. So my question again, why? Okay. Okay, I like the direction you're going. Satan has challenged God. I think it's a little bit deeper than that, though. What does Satan? What does the word devil mean? The Greek term for devil. Anybody know? Okay, adversary. That's kind of the name. The word Satan means adversary. Devil can also lend itself to that idea, but there's also the sense of slander. Okay. False accuser. Has there been any false accusations made here? Oh yeah, there's been some false accusation against Job and false accusations against God. But what has Satan done to God? Okay, you're not good enough. You're not worthy. So let me ask it this way. What has Satan done with regards to God's honor? He's challenging what? Okay, his integrity. Satan, in essence, has attacked the honor of God. you're not worthy. What does God do in reply? In response, what does God do? God doesn't prove it. He, with great trust and faith in his servant, says, I will let Job defend my honor. Now, I've got a question for you. When Satan attacks you through temptation, he's simply saying God's not worthy of your faithfulness. God's not worthy of your devotion. Will you be one that stands up and says, I will defend the honor of God? Because by God giving Satan free rein to tempt man, he simply is saying, I have trust in Dorcia, she'll defend me. I trust Curtis, he'll defend me. Matt, I have faith and confidence in Matt, he'll stand up for me. Craig will defend me. That's what we see taking place here. God, with great confidence and trust in Job, says, Job will defend my honor and justify me. Now, that's something to think about. Okay? All right. Any thoughts before we move forward? And we're going to kind of pick the pace up a little bit here. All right. Because now, this is just a question here with regards to why do the righteous suffer? I'm going to suggest to you, we could name multiple reasons, but I'm going to suggest to you, on the one hand, it's because God's allowing us to defend his honor. Okay? Here's a question, though, that we'll cover maybe at the end of this chapter or at the end of chapter 2. Why does God even allow pain and suffering to exist, period? Because we're fixing to see Job absolutely destroyed. Okay? Now, let's look at it. Let's go with verse 13. There was a day when the sons of and his sons and his daughters. Now, let's look at close of verse 12. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord, and what is he going to do? Okay, he's going to Job. Now, really and truly, all he has to do. Have you considered my servant Job? He's not devoted to you. He doesn't worship you. He doesn't honor you. So what should Satan do? Go and win Job. But what does he do instead of trying to win Job? He destroys Job. So Satan has no desire to win the affections and devotions of man. That's not what he wants to do. What Satan wants to do is to slander and destroy God. And how is he going to do that? By destroying man. Okay? So that's what he does. Verse 13. There was a day when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. Well, I suggest to you it's probably a birthday. Go back, what was it, verse 5? It was so when 4, his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day. Chapter 3, look at chapter 3, we'll start with verse 1. After this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. Does everybody have it that way in your translation? Do you have it different than his day? Okay, the day of his birth. How do we know it's the day of his birth? I'll tell you this much, that's not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew doesn't say the day of his birth right there, it just says his day. Let's read. Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born. That's how we know what his day refers to, and that's what the translators did there. They just put it there for us in that first verse, that opening verse. So what we have here in verse 12, there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house. Well, perhaps another celebration as it was in verse 4 of chapter 1, a birthday. And let me point this out too. Eating and drinking wine, the drinking of the wine, does not necessarily lend itself to drunkenness, because the term that's translated wine here does not automatically refer to strong drink. Look at, somebody read Jeremiah chapter 40 and verse 12. Jeremiah chapter 40 and verse 12, I believe, is where we want to go. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I want to make a point. Jeremiah chapter 40 and verse 12. Okay, wait, they gathered what? They gathered wine and fruit. You see what they're gathering? They're gathering the grapes and the other fruits. But what's it called? It's not called grapes. What's it called? Wine. It's the same word there, translated wine, as it is right here. But it's clearly a reference to just the juice that's in the fruit. Okay? So we don't need to try to, put on the children of Job that they're in some kind of a, drinking party here. They're in their eldest brother's house, and that's all it says about them until we get a little bit further. There came a messenger unto Job. Now, there's 2 things that we're going to emphasize. 2 words, they both start with an S. Number 1, severity. Number 2, swiftness. All right, severity and swiftness. We're getting a little bit of a picture here of the character of our adversary. When he attacks, he attacks with great severity, and he attacks very swiftly. All right, now watch this. There came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. There's theft. Yea, and have slain the servants with the edge of the sword. Well, 500 oxen, 500 of the donkeys, that's 1,000 of them. How many people were there watching those animals? Well, it was more than a couple. Okay? So all of them have been put to death with the edge of the sword, and I own. All right, there you see severity. I only am escaped alone. There's the severity. I only am escaped alone. All the animals taken, all the servants killed, except for me. That is severe. All right. Now here's a question: Who is the one who's behind all of this? Satan is. Well, why didn't he kill this one too? Got to have a messenger. Does Satan have his messengers today? Oh, yeah. Are they employed by him willfully, knowledgeably? No. Do we suppose this man, whenever he comes, that's the old devil that did this? No. As far as he's concerned, it's just randomly the Sabaeans have come up here, okay? This point. Had to have somebody. All right? Now, verse 16. While he was yet speaking, swiftness. While he was yet speaking. So he didn't even really get all the words out of his mouth. There came also another and said, the fire of God. Boy, you talk about, look at what the devil's doing right here. And the fire of God would be lightning. It's going to refer to lightning. Somebody read Exodus 9, verse 28. Exodus chapter 9 and verse 28. And I'll turn to Psalm 78. Exodus 9, 28. Whoever gets there first. Okay, that was 9:28. Thunderings and hail. Okay, listen to Psalm 78:48. He gave up their cattle also to the hail, and their flocks to hot thunderbolts. Thunderbolts. What's a thunderbolt? Lightning. So there you see a parallel passage there to Exodus. Okay, so this fire of God. Who is it that created nature and created all things that pertain to storms? We'll see this when we hit 38, 39, 40, and 41, all these things of creation. All right, but look what Satan does. Whenever this messenger of his comes, that he's employed though not willingly, who does he attribute the fire, the thunderbolts to? God. So whenever he comes, he says, God did this. Anybody here in insurance? Anybody ever run over a deer? What's the insurance? How do they claim that? You know how insurance is going to file that? Huh? Act of nature. Let me tell you how they used to do it in Tennessee. I was always told, hey, if a deer runs out in front of you or a dog runs out in front of you or whatever, don't try to miss it and hit the ditch, because then you're going to tell the insurance company, hey, a deer ran out in front of me and I missed it and I hit the ditch. You know what they're going to say? Right. I'm sure that's exactly what happened, Mr. Sherfus, and that's it, and it's all on me. You hit the deer, you know what they call it? An act of God. Okay? Nature, an act of God. That's how they write that off. All right? That's what this man says. He says, the fire of God is fallen from heaven. Well, lightning, and hath burned up the sheep, and the servants, and consume them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Look at the severity. Here comes lightning and burns up the sheep, consumes them. How many sheep did he have? 7,000 sheep. Okay, 7,000. What kind of lightning would it take to consume 7,000 sheep? How many men would it take? What was it, 1 for every 40 sheep is what we had guesstimated out to be? And you got 7,000? Look at all those servants that are dead. And this is attributed to an act of God, severity, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Now look at verse 17. While he was yet speaking, swiftness. He just barely gets the words out of his mouth. There came also another and said, the Chaldeans. Well, you know, I've got a pretty good idea. Job is already thinking, okay, Chaldeans, I know what those folks are like. And he's already had to deal. He's already been told bad news with regard to the Sabaeans. Now, have you ever had a bad day? And then that bad day just kind of got a little bit worse? And then what's maybe your thought process? Somebody comes up, hey, I got to tell you something. What's your thought process? Yeah, I'm just going to get back in bed. I don't want to hear what you got to tell me. Okay? When Job sees his servant coming, do you suppose he's thinking, boy, this better not be bad news? While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands. And so here's this group of Chaldeans, and they split up into 3 particulars and fell upon the camels. How many camels did he have? 500. And carried them away, yea, and slain the servants, stole all of the camels, and then killed all the men that were watching them. Severity. And then I only am escaped alone to tell thee how severe that is. 3,000, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 of the other 2. Verse 18, while he was yet speaking, swiftness. He barely gets the words out of his mouth. Do you suppose that Job knew the men that were watching the oxen and the donkeys? You suppose he knew who he had in charge of those? Do you suppose he knew who he had in charge of the camels? Who was in charge of the sheep? Do you suppose he knew the servants that was at the house of his children? What do you suppose Job is thinking whenever this one servant comes running up? This has just happened. Swift, severe. He already is a pauper now. He's lost everything. All his possessions are gone. He's lost it all. But at least I've got my family. And he turns, and lo and behold, here comes a servant from the house of his eldest son. And you can just almost hear Job, his voice shaking, saying, please God, no. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking in their eldest brother's house, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness. How will God speak to Job in chapter 38? Out of a whirlwind. Man, the deceptive nature of our adversary. And smote the 4 corners of the house. I picture, kind of a scene of a tornado, or, maybe some straight line winds coming across an open area. And the 4 corners of the house. So, the strength of the house. And it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. Man, no beating around the bush on that. I just wonder how that man's voice was when he's speaking it. So I'm speaking it very impassionately. Okay. And they are your sons, your children. And we know the girls were also involved, because you look at verse 13, sons and his daughters were there. Now he only mentions the sons. Well, that takes us back to verse 5. The sons and the daughters both had sacrifices offered for them. They're dead. Job, I hate to tell you this. Master, this is a servant. I hate to tell you. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. All of your children are dead. Now, what did Satan say that Job would do? He will curse you to your face. What does he do? Well, look at verse 20. Then Job arose. All right, let's get the picture. Job arose. What does that tell us about Job? Posture-wise. In order to arise, where do you have to be first? What would happen if somebody come and told you you've lost all your possessions, and whenever that's just really starting to settle in? I mean, this is all, if we had time to take, and if we just started at verse 13 or at verse 14 and read through, say, 19, how many minutes would it take us to read that? Just a few seconds. In a matter of a minute of time, Job has lost everything, and he's lost all of his children. Do you suppose that he went down to the ground? Let me tell you, I'm going to try not to tear up. Let me tell you about a man named Todd Walker. Remember Todd? Todd Walker, when we lived in Tennessee, there was an older couple there at church where we worship, Bob and Shirley Walker. Remember Bob and Shirley? Well, Bobby Joe, he was healthy, man. I mean healthy as an ox until he hit a certain age. And, man, he just stayed sick all the time. Well, he was diagnosed with a cancer. And he fought it. And I remember we were at camp, and we got word that, hey, he need to go to Bob and Shirley. So me and a couple other folks take off, and we get there, and they had a hospital bed there in the living room, and everybody's standing around. And Bobby Joe passed away. They had one child, Todd. And Johnson Williams Funeral Home, it's a local funeral home, and everything was already worked out with them. They pick up the phone, called. Here they come. They pull around to the backyard, back the hearse around, and they're bringing Bobby Joe out. And Todd was a big guy. He was pretty good. He was probably 6'3", sturdy. There was probably half a dozen men standing out there. They loaded Bobby Joe up. They shut the door. And when they shut the door, Todd just moaned. Just, and went down to his knees. And we had to help him up. Because the door shut his daddy's body up in that car. You suppose Job, when he hears all this news, is staggering, and then when he hears his children are gone, do you suppose, and he goes down to the ground. Do you suppose when he saw that particular servant coming that he went down to the ground before he ever heard the news? And he's sitting there holding on to these men? See, Job got knocked down. But then what did he do? How's that verse start? He got up. The adversary came as swiftly as he could and as severe as he could. And what did Job do? He got up. But then I want you to notice what happened. Then Job arose. Now, look at it. Rent his mantle, his cloak. What do you suppose Job wore? You reckon he's out there in an old tore-up T-shirt? You know, I've heard of folks that have a lot of money and they drive some old beat-up pickup truck. You wouldn't know they had any money just to see them. I got a pretty good idea. You saw Job, you knew he had some money. I don't need this. I don't need this purple anymore. I don't need this cloth of distinction anymore. I'm not a rich man. I'm a pauper. And in his extreme grief, rips it. Then what does it say he do? He did. Shaved his head. Now, let me just stop here for just a moment, because we have to really get the impact of this. Because what's about to happen is amazing. He shaves his head. I don't know that I picture Job rising up and immediately this happens and immediately he shaves his head. Look at verse 15. All the servants were killed with the edge of the sword. Who do you suppose went and gathered those bodies and made sure they were buried? Then you look at verse 16. All of these servants that were burned up with the fire, with the lightning, who do you suppose made sure all those bodies were gathered up? And then verse 17, all of these that were killed with the edge of the sword when the Chaldeans came, who do you suppose it was that went out to those fields where those beasts had been and gathered all those bodies up. And who do you suppose went to the house of Job's oldest son and pulled the bodies out of the rubble? So we don't ever think about that. Just, oh, they're gone. No. Then Job rents his mantle. And a sign of extreme grief, he shaves his head. And then, what's it say after he shaves his head? Fell down. Wait a minute, what? He rose up. He was knocked down by the adversary. Then he got back up. But then he fell down, and what did he do? He didn't curse God. He actually buried his face to the ground. The posture of Job was on his knees and his face to the ground. And rather than curse God, he acknowledged God as sovereign over all things. Then he says, naked came I from my mother's womb, naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And the word blessed there, it's not, we read in the New Testament the Beatitudes, blessed. Well, that's happy. Well, there's also a term in the Scriptures, blessed, and the idea is of praise and honor and glory. And it's only ever used of a man speaking of God. Praise, honor, and glory to God. Never a man speaking of another man in such a fashion. Okay? So it is praise, honor, and glory he is bestowing upon God. He acknowledges God's sovereignty. And then this amazing statement in verse 22, in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Anybody have it worded differently? I know you do. Charge God with wrong. Okay. What's the old saying? Some people say the devil made me do it. What's the opposite extreme? It's God's fault. Now, Job attributes what has taken place to Jehovah God, but he doesn't charge God with doing anything wrong. If you look at it from that translation, or he doesn't charge God foolishly, he doesn't foolishly speak against God, or he doesn't charge God with doing anything that was folly. However you'd want to translate that, either one of them would fit the context. And I just had a thought in my mind, and I lost it. Okay, maybe it'll come back to me. I know what I was going to say. Who else would Job consider would be responsible for these things that's taken place? We have someone says Satan. Well, we have absolutely no record through here that ever at any time that Job or anyone attributes this to the adversary. Never. Never. We'll go through every verse. You'll never see it. But he believes God's the one who has done this. Now, God's allowed it, and even God is going to acknowledge in chapter 2, verse 3, you've caused me to do this. In other words, when God allows something to happen because he's sovereign, he has all rule, all power. If he allows it, it is attributed to him. We see those occasions like that in the Scriptures. Well, Job attributes this to God. Look at everything that Job has gained and acquired through the years. And he's lost absolutely everything. And what happened? Well, the Chaldeans came, the Sabaeans came, fire from heaven comes, this great wind in the wilderness, the protection, the hand of God, or the working of God. All of these things that's taking place, only God could be behind such devastation. But even then, he doesn't say God's done this and he's wrong for it. He doesn't do any of that. The Lord gave me these things, and the Lord has taken them away. Blessed, praise, great glory and honor be to the name of God. And it's difficult for us to wrap our minds around. We get to the end of chapter 2. We're going to work to wrap our minds around. Here, let me ask this question, because we're going to get close to the end of class, even though we're going to jump into chapter 2. Why does God allow pain, suffering, death, sickness to exist in this world? I just want you to think about that. Let it marinate, okay? And ask yourself these questions. And this is, we may have already mentioned this is the greatest argument, strongest argument that the atheist thinks he has with regards to argument against God. The God of the Bible is all-powerful. True or false? True. The God of the Bible is all-loving. True or false? If the God of the Bible exists, then, according to the atheist argument, if he is all-powerful, but he allows pain, suffering, sickness, death to exist, if he's all-powerful, then he could stop it. He must not be all-loving. Or if he is all-loving, because one that's all-loving would never allow these things to exist, he must not be all-powerful. But if he's all-powerful and all-loving, why then do they exist? Now, there's an answer for that. Well, I thought Curtis was going to discuss it a little bit here this evening. That's outstanding devotional, by the way. What we're going to do at the end of chapter 2, that's the question we're going to answer. Why does God even allow sin or suffering, pain, death to exist? And I'm going to suggest to you this. The atheist says an all-loving God would not allow these things to exist. I'm going to tell you that if God refused to allow pain and suffering and sickness and death to exist, if he did not allow it to exist, he would not be all-loving. It's just the opposite. The atheist says if he is all-loving, he wouldn't. I'm telling you, if he didn't allow it, he would not be all-loving. And I'm going to give an explanation, some context of that when we get to the end of chapter 2. Now, with that thought in mind, let's jump into chapter 2, because there's a lot of things are repetitive, okay? Chapter 2, verse 1. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. Well, it's just repetitive. Now, what is the time frame here? Well, with God, he lives in eternity, so there is no time frame, but time frame with regards to Job. I don't believe this just is the next day as far as Job is concerned, because, you've got to let these things kind of settle in. Maybe Job's going to react by rising up and going down to worship, but once everything settles in and he realizes I'm a pauper, and he realizes my children aren't coming back, then that's when it's all going to hit. Have you ever seen that with somebody? What's the grieving process? Anybody can anybody tell me? Denial. Okay, what's next? Anger. Got to let it happen, see? So I'm going to suggest it's been a while since everybody's dead and buried, okay? This isn't just the next day in history, I suggest. For verse 2, the Lord said unto Satan, from whence comest thou? Well, verse 2 is a repetition. Verse 3, the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? All right, everything is repetition until, look down toward the end, a little over halfway of this verse, Job 2:3. And still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. Is that how it's worded for you? Do what? Incited me against him? I want you to notice there, God is sovereign. Now, was God the one who did these things? No. He allowed it to happen. Okay? But that's how we have it presented to us. All right, verse 4. Now we have a little bit different in our text here. Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yea, all that a man will give, all that a man hath will he give for his life. Okay, now that, I'm going to tell you, you talk about a slanderous statement. What had Job just lost? Lost all of his possessions. What else did he lose? It was skin for skin. Man would even give up his own kids just to save himself. Man, you talk about a slander. To save his own life. Of course, he's going to give up all of his possessions and even his own children. Well, but put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. Now, what did God say? All that he hath is in thy power. All that he hath, but don't touch him. Watch this. Verse 6, the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, this is scary. He is in thy hand. But save his life. How much time have I got, Douglas? Okay. But save his life. Now, man, there's so much to unpack from this. We don't have time. But I want to ask this question. Why did God say save his life? Why not kill him and put him out of his misery? Do what? If he loved him, he wouldn't even let him do this. That's what the atheist would say. Okay. There would have been no purpose in Job's life being taken. There is purpose in Job's life being spared. And what is that purpose? Glorifying God. Now, contrast Job to Christ. What about the life of Jesus? It was taken. Why? Because there was a purpose. There was a purpose. And what was it? God being glorified. Because by the death of Christ, salvation is offered to man. And God is glorified. Okay. He is in thine hand, but save his life. Well, we'll get a little bit further. We're going to have to save it for next week. We can get at least a couple more verses. So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown, from scalp to bunion, sore boils. Any of you ever had a boil? Painful. Any of you ever had shingles? My daddy had shingles. My daddy had open heart surgery, and he had shingles, and he said he'd rather have open heart surgery than shingles. He said it was the most painful thing he'd ever had in his life. Well, boils, sores that come up, just swell up. We'll talk a little bit more about it. Verse 8, he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down upon the ashes. Here's Job, from the greatest to the least, from great wealth to poverty. He is sitting in, what does it say? Among the ashes. Where is that? Where's he sitting? He's in the local trash dump. It's not just ashes. What else is there? Broken pottery. Go see Job. Where is Job? He's down at the trash. He's at the garbage dump. What's he doing? Sitting out there, right in the middle of all of it. What's he doing? He's scraping those boils. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Is Bell about to hit me? Okay. Well, we'll save some time for Miss Job. We'll talk a little bit more about this next week. We're going to talk more about the physical suffering of Job. We just see the sore boils, but there's so much more, and we're going to note them through the book. There's about 10 or 12 other symptoms that we see with regards to Job. We always give Miss Job a hard time, but I'm telling you something, we need to sympathize with her, because you know what? She lost more than Job did. You ever think about that? How did she lose more than Job? Because she had to sit there and watch him suffer. All right, let's stop right there. We'll pick back up next week, chapter 2. What about verse 8, 9,